Welcome to Morning Brew for Marketing Executives, the podcast where senior B2B marketing leaders from globally recognized brands in complex industries share their stories and experiences. Here we dive into the world of marketing leadership and hear more about what it's like to be a marketing leader. Today, we discuss customer experience and retention with Bita Popovic from Trimble. As a global head of customer retention marketing with a comprehensive background in customer success leadership, marketing, sales, and even engineering, she shares her thoughts on this broad topic. Listen more about the journey from engineering to customer centricity, who should own the customer experience in a company, and what advice she gives for leaders working in industries where CX hasn't traditionally been a focus. This episode is hosted by Yanni Hovila, the Managing Director of Maven First, who has over a decade of experience working with marketing professionals in complex industries. Let's get started.
Hi, Bita. Thanks for being at the Morning Brew show. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm great. I'm looking forward to this topic and to this session.
We have a very broad topic, customer experience, customer retention today to discuss. But before that, it's always great to hear your story, how you have ended up here working with the customer experience and customer retention at Trimble.
I appreciate that. So my journey started by embracing innovation and change in technology. I started my role in engineering and in technical roles and sort of built a strong foundation in problem solving and understanding the customer needs and pains. And as I moved into marketing and sales, I began to broaden my perspective around the strategical approach of these factors and how that affects the total organization and the business. And it's really been an evolution that's led me to where I am today.
Yeah, that's so your background is more on the technical side of things, not sales or marketing. Am I right?
That's correct. That's correct. I've started as a civil engineer and then worked through a couple of years in the start of my career as application engineer and did some engineering work. And then realizing that when I was working with sales and marketing teams, a lot of the value that I could provide was actually making that gap smaller.
Yeah.
The understanding and breaking it down and making it comprehensive for teams to then take that and build it into a plan or understanding their customers better. And I sort of became curious about how I could put that into a skill set that I hadn't educated myself around. So I started building out both my skills and trained and then started to get into marketing and sales, basically.
So engineering customer experience is the topic for today. That's great. We are now recording this in halfway March. What's on your desk right now in 2025?
Well, right now it's a mix of strategical documentation, it's campaign performance data, it's cross-functional project. But a big part of my focus is actually figuring out how customer engagement and retention strategies can be improved. As you all know, we are in a time of fast-paced changes that are hitting both marketing and what we call the customer journey and experience, and continuing to improve that and making it smarter and better and applicable is what is at my desk right now.
That sounds like a lot, and it's good to hear that it's never ending. We can always improve customer experience, and of course the programs driving that experience as well. What keeps you motivated on this topic? Gives you the fuel to be so excited about this topic?
Well, I love the learning and innovation. That has sort of always been the curiosity that brought me forward in every step that I've taken building out this journey and basically my career. Working in marketing today is, as I just said, is evolving rapidly. So companies that prioritize digital first strategies and are seeing huge engagement and retention gains. I think that type of transformation is really exciting, and to be part of that and live and breathe it, it's challenging enough for me to keep me motivated and continue to evolve, but it's also helping me to bring together the skill set that I brought throughout the years, specifically the technical and problem solving one, right? It's starting to definitely bring in a lot of those skill sets that maybe I didn't have to go as deep with. But because it's becoming very data-driven, you need to understand the technologies, adapt it, and start to see the intersections. I guess that's the motivation and that's the carrot.
I think this topic around customer experience when talking with different marketing executives is very crucial one, because many marketing executives in complex industries think through like, this is the comms part we do, this is the commercial part we do, the branding and everything as well. But should we take ownership about customer experience and retention? I think that's a topic now surfaced in many of those conversations. So can you give an introduction level, if you think about customer experience, customer retention, how are you defining that? Or is that the full journey the customer is experiencing from the start to finish? And can marketing take ownership of that?
Very wide and great question. I would say, again, that because of the character of how business models are changing, how companies go to market, how we serve up our products, there is a lot of need for improvement based on traditional ways versus the new era that we live in. If you look at your personal experience as a consumer, so if we see on the B2C side, you can see the evolution that has happened. How you self-serve, how you subscribe to a service, how you expand that service and continue to invest based on your own preferences. And what really happens is that brand and organization supports you throughout that journey, right? So it touches you at the right moment with the right information. It also keeps a little bit of track and understanding of what could be predicted as a behavior that would drive you towards making other decisions. I think the maturity in that with customer experience and mapping what has traditionally been customer experience has grown due to this. So if we look at the old-fashioned maintenance models where you would talk about the customer experience, but it would basically be the buyer experience, right? It would be how to go to market, how to provide that service and campaign it out, and then you would build a traditional funnel and you would push people down that funnel, and then you would come to a handshake. And at best, you would prepare for a post-sales service. That was it. And then the next time around, you would do the same thing and you would do the same thing. With the change that we've made in the subscription models, basically, right? The consumption models of an evergreen consumption where you are on a subscription that you have to renew with the brand that you're part of. Loyalty has really tipped on its end. The thought about what it means to be a loyal customer has significantly changed for companies. And mapping out that journey, as you said, from A to Z, it doesn't anymore mean that it ends with the buyer experience. It's actually the full flow of every touch point that I will ever have with this company, whether if it's pre-sales or if it's post-sales, whether if it's an outreach or it's digital. So I would say it's becoming a hygiene factor. It's not a choice anymore. And the companies that are doing this at their best right now, they are seeing an optimized satisfaction rate by almost 25%. They have dropped churn rates. So the unsubscribing people from their services, it drops by 20%. The retention focused models is actually growing their year-to-year growth. So it's a growth engine, is not only protecting the current business, which is, I think, the biggest change that I've seen since I've started working in these fields.
That's a good point, that it's not only to defend our revenue from existing customer, but it's actually, as you mentioned, a revenue driver initiative, more profit driver initiative in a sense. But if that's crossing all organizational borders and boundaries and all those typical silos, in your opinion, who should own the whole process in the company, and how we avoid, because of course in many industries you have very distinct sales organization, then you have probably the marketing function as well. Maybe it's a service function in professional service setting, or it's in industrial company you have a bunch of different offering areas working with the same customer. So, in your opinion, maybe biased opinion as well, but
Not at all.
but who should own, in a perfect example, who should own it?
Well, I'm going to say my bias actually tends to be because I've also led customer success teams, and I've worked in technical fields, and I've been in sales. So, and that is the strength. I would say I continue to go back to it's a shared responsibility across, is no longer pushing it down through a predefined model. Is really understanding the depth and the value that you bring at every touch point. And there is no one department that can figure that out because we all have different level of understanding. So leveraging that data across the board from all of these functions and bringing it together is key. But I would also say that marketing is uniquely positioned to lead the change because we do set the tone for the entire customer journey. In the end of the day, that's sort of the skill set and it's the value add that both from a brand perspective, from a loyalty perspective, from a retention perspective, has always been partially or fully with marketing. So I think having one pointed leader, having one executive leader that leads that in the organization is important to get organizational alignment. And then having a council that brings that in with the shared key stakeholder across different customer facing teams, but also non-cross facing teams. Like many of them need to consume the data that's produced. So as you just mentioned, breaking the silos is probably the most important part, and aligning the KPIs across these departments so that success is measured in the customer experience outcome and not in the individual goals that we are driving. A great example is support deflation, right? So if we have a technical support team that is taking calls, they are in their nature, they're supposed to be more of a reactive pain relief for our organization. But where we need to leverage is to understand how we can impact that. What is the deflation rate that we can have by being proactive in either having a much more straightforward onboarding process or a more comprehensive, support documentation or technical documentation to self-serve. So it's those dependencies and those measurement KPIs that need to really be woven together rather than worked in siloed in each department and then somehow combined, because that's not the world that we live in anymore. Our customers are across the board. They might be in these separate journeys, and yet it's a combined one. So
yeah, basically, we need someone to lead the initiative and be an executive stakeholder to kind of give the backbone almost to the initiative and of course oversight budget and everything and make sure we aligned in those silos or different departments. If you think, let's say we have that in place, on your experience, what systems, processes we need or you have seen work to build that accountability in the marketing, in the sales, in the R&D department? What we need in place to then, when we have the initiative, to actually bring that alignment and kind of keep that vision for the customer. If vision is probably a very strong term to use, but keep that alive in the day-to-day lives of, let's say, support or R&D or different functions.
well, I think the backbone, it's probably the key factor because, again, if we look across the board, prioritization is normally the hardest job for leadership, right? So an understanding of how to align what is at your desk and what needs to be done versus where we need to pivot towards. And not having alignment in where we need to be versus where we are today complicates things. Because even if you have goodwill, and even if you have discussions, and even if you mapped out your customer journey, I know that a lot of recommendations is based on that, right? You start by map out your customer journey. By the time you mapped it out, is already changed. That's how fast we're moving right now. So if you're going to concentrate on only trying to understand where we are currently, you're probably going to have your hands full by doing only that. And then continuing to upholding what is business critical in order to function, because you always have a current stack of customers as well. So that alignment from an executive perspective of giving a direction of this is where we're going to pivot and this is where we're going to invest, both with our money, with our people, with our change. and aligning that and getting buy-in from different teams, and then building the measurements. So set goals. Start by looking at what is the goals that you're trying to achieve across the board, and how does every team contribute to that. And if there is a compensation model that needs to be in place, get that done. And those are many of the factors that when I see in the everyday, day-to-day work, actually when you come all the way down to the execution part of it, you realize that some of these factors have been thought about, but you don't have a decision made on them. So make the decision, take away the friction that you see between organizational alignment and why we should do what we are doing, and then get your people aligned to do that. And I would also just touch on the last one, which is regularly share out those data points. The customer feedback and the customer stories and the measurement, the MPSs, the UX, the usage within app. These data points, we talk about them as we have a big data pool, but they stay silos, just as the department groups, they stay silos. And also when they get shared out, there might be a different takeaway that a marketing executive takes from looking at the customer feedback versus what a UX person does, right? So don't take for granted that what you have interpreted that you're using that data for is the only way that it can be used for, because that creativity really comes from the expertise that you have in your field.
So kind of cross-functional team, or if I'm reading between lines, it's almost like this needs to be a management team level topic. It's like a regular topic where we have that cross-functional team already, different executives presenting different units and departments. You touched based on that, start with the vision, kind of end result. What's the goal? Not to start with where we are now. Can you skip that part totally? Or because when I see the customer experience initiatives and typically that's the starting point. Let's map out our customer journey, and we spend 6 months there. We map every interaction, and then we have a pretty map how our, so to speak, typical customer journey is. But to start with the goal in mind, that's can we skip the journey mapping totally, or would you come back to that after the goal is very, very clear and the kind of end result you want from this initiative?
I think exactly that, right? So I normally don't use that many sports analogies, but if you think about a coach setting a goal for how to win a game, what do you start with? You start by defining that you're going to win the game. If you don't know how you're going to win the game, then you can work all you want on your best players. You can work on all the strategies of how you're going to play the game. You can work on understanding the competitive, but you don't know how to win the game. So getting that secured, making sure that it's tied back to, we are working in businesses, right? What is the business? What is every single person, every single department, and every single KPI that we set? How does that tie back into the total business that we are driving? And how does that impact it? And then set measurable goals. If we say that we want to reduce churn by 10%, or if we want to increase our onboarding engagement by 15%, that is going to differ depending on which goal you set, which part of the journey then you map out. And with complex organizations such as mine, when you have a much, much, much wider, right? You don't provide one solution to the market. You don't have even one department for each thing. You need to be very conscious about how much time you spend on mapping the journey. So absolutely, you need an understanding of what is the reality and where you are. But I would say, just as you use your Google map, you don't look at the entire Sweden map at the same time when you're driving to Stockholm. You actually put your point to Stockholm, and then you start to map out which is the fastest way there.
Yeah, that's a good analogy to use. Like, start with your goal. I want to be at this place in Stockholm, and then zoom in on the area around it, so I know how to get there. But if you use the navigating strategy, I'm still a little bit on the fence. Like, for me, it was a revelation. You mentioned that it must be that when we start mapping now, it takes so long time and we're in fast-paced environment that it kind of it's already old data when we finish that mapping. Do you see a difference? Of course, you work in software and you have a bunch of digital data in place. But if I would now put you in charge of starting the same customer retention and experience initiative, let's say an industrial company, do you see a difference there? Because it's in nature, it's almost, I would like to say, slow paced compared to software, but we have much more probably offline interaction as well, and maybe a little bit different. So what's your take on that?
That's a great point, and I think that's where we started also a little bit of call it when we give examples in customer experience and customer journey, we also sort of rely on B2C, where you have access to the end user. In a B2B, you might actually not. You might have an account that you're closing, and they might have end users, but sometimes you don't have the in between. With the hardware, and I've actually worked in heavy industry where part of the conversation is, do they even have an email, or do they go to the office to even open that information that they receive? What I led with leading a customer success team at that time actually was the realization of these people still are working in a society, right? So even if across the globe this is differentiates, right? Even the access to Wi-Fi, if you're working offshore, might be different. But the fact that our expectation on what a brand is responsible for has changed. We rely on the company and on the brand to actually have something prepared for us. And those companies that haven't, I think there was a data point that I read that millennials, one bad experience, like completely removes their loyalty and they leave the brand. Something around 67 to 80% actually. So you get one shot. Sometimes you only get one shot. And with the heavy industry or industries where you're not as tech adaptive, I think the baseline expectation is still changing because those people are humans that are functioning and working in society. They are picking up their Uber apps and ordering Fedora food, right? So they are expecting for you to take away those friction points, no matter if you can deliver it instantly or if you have to deliver it through a different experience. One of our big points was that when you work in field, you sort of have to take a USB drive and put it in the machine in order to upload the next feature upset, right? And that's something that it's time consuming. You need to book someone that's going to go out to you. If you can get connected to that machine and if you can upload that information at that point, it's not necessarily so that they need to be up and running all the time. But at those touch points that you have identified are critical frictions, you still need to deliver faster, smarter, and probably a little bit more modern than what you traditionally did, right?
Yeah. That's a good analogy because I'm just thinking like the heavy industry is like how strange it is that I have a manufacturing plant and I need to call someone to put in a USB stick to it and upgrade the software for the whatever the machine does. But when I go back home and I have the heating pump, I just redo our heating system in my home.
Exactly.
I just connect that to Wi-Fi and it upgrades automatically. So the disparity is so big in that sense. So that's a good point. That removing the friction, no matter the industry, in that sense. Going back to the ownership, who should own the whole initiative? How do you balance the kind of power or ownership between departments, marketing, IT, sales, when it comes to CX initiatives in general? Is there a balance to be had, or is that something not to worry about?
I would say that it depends on where your function is supposed to take away that friction, right? So if you think about by nature, if sales is responsible for closing a deal or growing an account, what they need to provide or what they need to be aware of in that journey might differ a little bit versus what, again, like a technical support team needs to do. Understanding that and not relying on it being one size fits all, and then balancing between the reactive and the proactive one. when we talk about customer centricity, I don't think I've ever talked to anyone at any company that would take a hard look at themselves and say that we haven't been customer centric. Because by the name of the nature of that of it, we say, well, we have happy customers.
Yeah.
Where the challenge is to actually roll it back and start looking at early indications of churn, right? Rather than waiting for something to happen. It's looking at your trapped customers. How much are you actually investing? And these are the biggest numbers that many of us have to manage, right? How much maintenance does it go into a trapped customer that is not growing, that is not buying more, and that is basically something that you're householding? If you look across the board, you realize that what we call customer centricity means a lot of that is to continue to focus on the ones that you already know, where if you think about a business objective of growth and maintenance and pivoting your business models and becoming faster into the market, etc., what you normally say is if you stay the same, you actually become worse, right? So I would continue to iterate and say, yes, we need to take care of it. There is no one set of answers that's going to be the right answer for any organization. This is ever changing, but then there is commonalities. Every single customer and every single organization that you talk with say that we are a little bit different.
That's almost the same as consultants saying it depends.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then in the end of the day, if you look at it, if you zoom out and you look at the what they are doing, is not that different. They're investing a lot of their existing workforce and a lot of their budget, etc., in maintaining their existing customer base.
Yeah.
How do you make that smarter? How do you shift that from a hands-on and people-driven to a digital-driven experience? What are the automation points that you can do in order to free up more power and more budget? And that is the experience improvement in general, right? It's not understanding how many more customer stories you need.
Yeah.
Because many of us have already done these things. Much of it is already been mapped out. It's how intelligently you are infusing your journey with it, what you are repeating, how you are keeping it constant, so that what we are now calling omnichannel, that has been the word that's been going around, is not really omnichannel, it's multi-channel.
Yeah.
You are just delivering through different channels. But if you actually look, if you call up an e-commerce company today, which has happened to me, they say, oh, our stocks holding, our stack holding is not the one as we have in the store. So you need to call the store separately and you need to call the e-commerce space separate. They're different departments. They're working differently. I don't care. As a customer, I don't care. So put yourself in that seat, go through the experience, and then realize what's actually going on and how can you improve that, rather than thinking, oh, I have my goals with sales or I have my goals with success.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm thinking like how we balance also the short-term gains and the long-term thinking, just based on the nature of different departments. You are probably leaning either way, more or less. Of course, it should be that we all think long-term as well with the short-term goals in mind. But by nature, would you say that any customer experience initiative is a little bit more long-term initiative by design than short-term wins?
I would say if you still haven't invested in it, start looking at that map to Stockholm, right? So start with the quick wins, put a couple of measurable goals in place and get everyone aligned on those goals. By doing that, that's going to already pivot the mindset and the change needed in the organization to work against the same common goal and understand the value that you need to add rather than the activity that you need to have.
Yep.
Many of us are still based on, and I think you were talking about another part of this podcast series where we are talking about accountability versus activity, right?
Yeah.
We as humans traditionally are very bothered with activity. We want to make sure that if we have our right mindset at work, we want to do a good job. And I believe truly that everyone wants to do that.
Definitely.
My understanding of how I do that takes not only a self-awareness, but it also takes organizational alignment. Because if I don't have that connected to the bigger one, what I'm doing on an everyday basis, if I'm investing a 2-hour call with a customer, that's what's important. That's where I have control, right?
Yeah.
But my understanding of what did this 2-hour do to the total account, or how can I change it so that it become more efficient, or I can provide additional ways where it doesn't take 2 hours from me and it would take maybe half as much as that time, is going to rely on that total understanding of how do I click into the next and the next part of it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, going back to it, I say if you don't have something in place, look for the quick wins, look for the friction points, and make sure that you're not trying to, as they say, eat the elephant as once, right? Like you need to find a way to approach it that makes sense. And that's not also getting a full stop into your organization, because you need to be able to balance what is existing business critical and which activities that you are calling business critical. But if you actually take the lens of how does this tie back into the goal that we are driving, you can't measure it.
Yeah, therefore. You started laying the steps to build the customer experience initiative. So if I take now a role, let's say I work in a corporate sized any B2B company in somehow complex industry, no matter if that's industrial consulting or IT software. And I work as a marketing executive, and I see that we don't have clear ownership for the CX initiatives, or we don't have clear ownership in our management team for the customer experience as a whole. Now you laid the groundwork by first step, zoom in on the Stockholm map and pick some measurable goals and start there. But how would you continue building that initiative from after I have now zoomed in on the Stockholm map and decided that my goal is the Grande Hotel in overview to the sea and everything? So how would you continue from there to build your CX initiative?
That's where data becomes important. That's when you start with predictive analytics. You start to, again, use the data not only to solve the issues and the friction points that are obvious. You start to plan for where it's going to be. So you're not looking where it's raining today, but you're looking where the storm is going to hit. And balancing that in today's world, where I don't think anyone goes a day not hearing about AI-driven strategies, right? Understanding how you're going to go from here to there, right? It's no longer about the fastest route. It's about which type of transportation. It's about completely revolutionizing or rethinking your competitive market approach, etc. That is going to be where you win or lose the game, by leveraging that predictive analytics data. And the companies that do that at best, I think at the start, it was almost by the era where you started to create a web page, right? It was everyone started to create a web page. No one really knew how we're going to use it. And then we started to understand, all right, this is probably the way that we would get in touch with our users. We started to build out an experience that would lead them through and make them come into our world by their own initiative. Continuing to work in these evolutions, whether if it's social media or if it's AI or if it's the next step, it's still using data points to understand what's going on and then predicting the future of where we are going at and where we're going to be. This hyper-personalization that we are talking about and the expectation that will come from customers, because there is no longer one journey. The more I listen to industry, thought leadership discussions, etc., the more we are believing that because we now have data and we have AI, it's really going to be a super adaptive experience for each customer.
Yeah.
It's just, how do you get from here to there, right? What do you do with everything that you already created? Whether if it's assets or if it's self-served material or if it's a network space for your customers to build loyalty. How do you pivot from serving them or pushing them into a journey and into a line of go from step A to B and building a traditional nurture program to building this hyper-personalization? My only answer to that is predictive analytics. You need to see the data that you haven't been concentrated on. You need to map out what you don't see.
In the software base, we have basically the usage data. We have kind of
Exactly.
bunch of leverage to use to predict those. But if I'm now thinking the heavy industry side of things as well, would you say that just regular old scenario planning kind of works? It's not the forecast, but it gives you some scenarios where it might end up without that data. Of course, it's more guesswork, but how would you alternate if you don't have the data in place? Or if you use heavy industries or consulting houses, we do engagements and we don't have that deep data. Of course, there's bunch of data still to be used, but it's in a little bit different format. So would scenario planning work as an alternative?
It could. I think also why customer success teams have grown and why customer success has grown as a department is that exact factor where we do need humans or where we do need quarterly business reviews with our existing customer base.
Yeah.
Rather than it being sales driven, it needs to be consultancy driven, right? You need to be able to talk about the value that you're providing to solve the problem for that customer, and that differs. Again, if you take a generic understanding of it and you go to them with, here is the next solution, without really understanding have they implemented the old one, you are not talking the same language.
Yeah.
And companies are becoming more and more interested in aligning their business objectives with their solution providers, right?
Yeah.
Whether if it was against our sustainability goals or whether if it's having the same growth or potential or something, right? They want to understand that you get them. You're interested in their business. So use your customer success department to do that proactive analysis, have the quarterly business reviews, make sure that you have a book of business with those customers that goes beyond the sales team's revenue-driven aspects, right?
Yeah.
That goes beyond problem solving. I think that still is not as mature in those fields as we could be. Is back to your experience with your heating system at home.
Yeah.
If you actually look at it, you start to realize that what you take for granted is still not really in place. They have a technical support or they have someone that comes back to them. But no matter if you're looking at the heavy industry, they are companies. They're also looking into winning more bids, being able to provide better value to their customers, being able to get better growth from their existing. And if you can prove how your solutions can bring that to them, then you're home, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if there's someone from Nibe, the company, I think it's a Swedish origin company, listening, I have a bunch of recommendations you can implement. Like if I need to change filters every 3 months, can I have a push notification month before, not the day I need to change that, as an example? Because then you are like, oh, I have used all my filters and I need to order more, as an example. Yeah, that's a
perfect example.
A good point, and as consumer based, and now my mind is flowing. And you talk about the value side of things. I think that's touching base. I listened yesterday webinar or keynote about what AI does to marketing in terms of content. That you really need to go deep on the value you provide. And a kind of baseline is if you type the topic for ChatGPT or any AI, Gemini or anything, that's the baseline, and that doesn't provide any more value. You need to build from there and provide the value. So basically, we're talking about the same thing from a little bit different angle. So I think the threshold, and if I'm thinking like account management, the consultative way of selling, or it's more like value selling, how we sell the value, we really so we understand your business's value drivers. So it's very value based, and that's a big topic and put big emphasis on how deep you need to understand as a company your customers' way of working and value creation models and goals and everything. So it's It's a tough ask for many marketing executives.
Oh, for sure it is. And I think working only for technology companies, I also see the difference, right? Where you have been so product driven, and there is something called PLG, right? Product led growth. But I think what we called product led growth has also changed. So again, we're using the words, but they don't mean the same thing anymore.
Yeah.
So where I started early in my career, it was more about the differentiation, the next function that you can build in the product, that would pick you out from your competitor, right? You try to stand out with your technology. We know that the technology stack is becoming more and more woven. The differentiation between a cell phone that you use are not much different. Some of it might be the UX, and some of it might be how fast and how good it works. And it's the same thing in our field. Is if you look across the board, because of your access to a global buying experience, you can vet and you can actually have a good understanding of what is available to you much, much faster. And the lines are becoming erased between what is sticking you out as the winning technological provider.
Yeah.
So the outcome that you can provide is going to be your winning card. That's going to differentiate you. It's how do you use that technology and what do you do with it that provides value.
Yeah.
The value used to be, I communicate the next feature and now we have 10 new buttons for you. Well, the question right now is, why would I bother? And do I have time to bother, right? So yes, that changes the product marketing teams group. That changes how we communicate value with back to the web pages, right? Where we were sort of trying to find a way you can create with a few clicks and basic technology stack that you can purchase and subscribe to. You can get up and running as a business. And that really pivots the big companies' business models on its head, right? Because when you're a startup and you are very, very humble and you're concentrated on a very specific segment, you're still utilizing the same principles to getting to that customer. So now we are competing on the same level, but the expectation on your brand and the expectation for you to pivot faster in a big company versus a startup is the same. But you have this complexity that you need to take in consideration. So understanding that and really making sure that everyone is working against that value delivery and not only continuing to talk about, well, we need to stick out with our technology. Yes, it's important. It's the hygiene factor. It's always been we need to continue to understand why we deliver what we deliver. But you need to be much more articulate about the value that it provides to this user versus what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's especially for technology company that comes from really revolutionizing and building a tech stack from an engineering or a technical perspective. They start to realize that they need to use other muscles.
Definitely. All right, if I pull this back where we started, I'm now the marketing executive thinking no one owns, for some reason, customer experience in the management team, or there's no function who owns it at the moment. How I have now decided I want to take that part. I see such a big impact for our business and risks involved if we don't take that as a ownership or start that initiative. How would you structure and get the buy-in around the management team or senior leadership to prioritize the CX initiative and of course the budget and everything that goes in it?
I would critically ask them, what is their growth strategy? Currently, the cost of acquiring a new customer is almost 5 times versus losing one. So growing your existing customers and not having those trapped customers and not going back, it's not playing defense. It's actually bringing value to how to grow your business. So I would ask, are you that well set? And probably the answer and the reason why it's not happening is that's becoming very, very clear, right? So as we compete on the same market and as these channels changes and the acquisition cost goes up, you need to find a way to tone into where you can be smarter about what you're already doing So that would be the highlight: is what is your growth strategy and how are you getting there? If not this, then what?
Yeah, and I'm thinking like when we work with or build a business case for any change initiative with our customers, I always by default try to find the cost of inaction, and I prefer that contrary to ROI, because if we can find without this initiative we lose this much money and we continue losing it until we change something, it's almost like physiological game that it feels worse to lose something than how good it feels to gain something, and we will lose that. So can you give a pointers on that? Where would you start looking for those cost of inactions in terms of lack of customer experience programs or initiatives? Any quick finds, like start looking for around there, of course, journeys in software companies, but any other ideas for that?
I think we touched on it a little bit. I would say again the acquisition cost, right? So
Yeah.
that is one of the biggest drivers. Is
Hmm.
the lack of inaction is it will cost you more
Yeah.
to gain new customers. Just
Yeah.
period. It will cost all of your departments. It will eat up your marketing budget, and is not a foolproof, future-proof
Hmm.
strategy. So that's the biggest impact. But then again, if we talk about trends and support and self-service, etc., if you stay still, especially at this time, look at from where we've moved with AI from last year, right? It's not an option anymore. It's not about choosing whether you want it or not. It's an hygiene factor.
Hmm.
It's going to be the win or lost for your company. And we've seen
Yes.
companies come and go and sort of joke a little bit about, well, that's not for us. And we are very niched, or we work in technology.
Yeah,
And then yet,
the famous Kodak example.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's over and over and over. Everyone says we are not Netflix, but the matter of fact is, when new generations, new expectation, new personal, buying behaviors or experiences, etc., affect us,
Hmm.
that's gonna matter. It's gonna be top on mind. And if you go through something else that is not there, that's gonna be a bad experience.
Yeah.
And if I get to choose, if I find and that is served up, I mean, as we were talking about loyalty, because we know loyalty is also changing and how we are building that, whether if it is that you invest in this, having your CEO available, radiant and talking and becoming personal, or if it's something else, we need to really start thinking about these new strategies. It's if we continue to do what we've always done, it will only take us so far.
Hmm.
And that timeline is shortening by the day, by the hour.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say take that as a warning sign,
Hmm.
not only a vision anymore and not only a mission, but it's here. It's hitting us. It's already a part of it. If you're not already working towards it, then you need to have really good answers for why not.
Yeah, definitely. Now I will set you ready for probably an answer. It depends. Let's see how it goes. Let's say I, as a marketing executive, start this initiative. I get the buy-in from the board or management team. I get the budget. How long is the time to impact? When I can see effects, first effects, like business effects, after starting the program?
Depending on where you focus. If you are focused from day one, if you think about what we were talking about, that the experience for a subscribing customer, it's evergreen, right? It's at all touch points. And back to the early indication of churn, we know that getting fast up and running and the time to value that you provide in the very early stages of the first 60 days significantly impacts your investment and whether you stay with that product or not. So if you get it right and you can measure it, as we were talking about, if you're leveraging the in-app user data, if you're understanding how to improve those key milestones that is bringing value, then it would be instantaneous.
Yeah.
You will not, depending on what cadence you're in seeing it in your book of business, you might not be able to measure it from day one more than the activity, but that's the impact. And that's also the downside. If you don't do it by that time, there is a whole lot of numbers that we can throw out there, right? But if you think about a trial experience, or if you think about the free product experience, if you're not up and running and activated, is out of mind. You're
Yeah.
out. You've done all of these acquisitions. You've paid tons of money to get them into trying out your product, and they're lost by the time you're ready to serve something up. So yeah, be very conscious and very understanding of where you want to infuse that. I would say the biggest impact if you're starting still is that implementation and time to value. Get up implemented and get up and running.
Yeah.
And because we cannot grow as fast as we want with our human power and our product services teams, etc., both from a level of getting the people trained fast enough, but also getting it served up fast enough. Back to the analogy of getting to the field with the USB, right? It's just
Yeah.
it's a certain amount of those drives that you can do a day. That needs to, again, be thought about. Where do we leverage the self-served? Where can we be smarter? Where can we have a network community that you from day one as a user have access to, when you're not just thrown into your own mercy of finding this 2,500 technical documentations that we created for you, but that we understand where you're at and we serve up what might be of interest and what others have used at that point. And it continued to use data to continue to understand that more and more, and sort of provide me with a little bit more intelligence that I would be.
Yeah.
And these are baseline things, but if you look critically at it, again, many organizations still are struggling on that level to understand and make that change between, all right, we have all of this, and now what do we do with it, and how do we serve it up?
Yeah, there's kind of bridge the gap in that as well. And of course, working from different industries, there's the baseline is a little bit different in regarding. So I think that's good insight at what might be coming if you start right now. As of now, 2025, what trends you see shaping the customer retention? I think 5 years is a long time to predict, but let's say in 3 years, can you give us a forecast in that sense?
I wish I had a magic, well, how do you say, window looking into the future. And I think it becoming harder and harder, right? We have been talking about, I don't know, like when did Siri in your iPhone showed up?
Yeah.
When you could ask it questions and no one know what to do with it, versus when companies are now trying to keep their workforce out of ChatGPT for everything and anything, right? So when things hit and how it's gonna happen, it's probably the hardest one. And we all know that is going to impact. We all know that it's going to be investing in heavily in the different channels, such as in-app guidance, such as network community expansions, providing that self-service and using analytics. Those are definite trends that are, again, as I was saying, if they were innovation and good to have, and someone was doing it really fantastic and everyone else was looking at them saying, oh, that is something we would like to do, in 5 years, probably that's what everyone is doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you're not going to be relevant without it. You're not going to be able to deliver as fast and grow in the pace that you need as a business if you don't use that.
Yeah.
So customer data platform, being able to build and predict and use all of the analytics data that you have on your users, on your customers, of understanding their business, etc. Again, if we were building that, sales was looking at the latest report from a business in order to predict what they would be willing to invest in your company. That is not the only way to use that data anymore. It needs to be all connected. You need to understand the impact that it will have in existing user base. You need to understand what trends they are looking to grow in, where they're going in the world. That's another aspect of immersive markets, right? So where are we going next and how are we getting there? Yeah, I would say those are a couple of channels, change of channels, rather than to traditional email marketing channels, more in-app, in-product, creating different loyalty programs through network community expansions, etc. AI, we've already talked about, analytics, and a solid customer data platform.
Yeah. That sounds like a lot to handle, but I think that's, if we dive deep to any domain inside marketing or customer life cycle, in a sense, it goes deep. All right. Taking a little bit shorter view, if we start wrapping up, it's now coming closer from the 3-year forecast. If you could give any tips for marketing executive that they could implement right now, starting on next week, Monday, what would it be?
I would say, and this has been probably one of the exercises that I could take credit for, that I do regularly, is run your customer walkthroughs. Have your teams experience the product as a customer.
Mystery shopping, in a
Yeah,
sense.
and be on the other side of the line, right? It's not only about, again, the emails that you're providing until you acquire them,
Yeah.
but the full experience, the operational communication that is going out, the transactional information that is going out, the touch points that they're having. Get a good feeling of that. Once you start to experience what they're experiencing, I guarantee you, people are start to identify those friction points immediately. They start to see areas of improvement, because again, what we built at some point might not be what we want to stay with. And many of these things belong in friction ownership with different teams, with different departments. And it's not always that that's connected because someone changed something over there, that this team knows about it. So do that as a regular exercise, run through that rather than mapping out the totality. Have an experience line of like, this is how it is today. And then what I think also, automate everything possible.
Yeah, no. So
Like
you are a big
remove
AI believer.
well, not maybe AI, but remove repetitive tasks and free
Okay.
up teams for strategic work, right? I
Yeah.
believe that there are so many things that, because we've done them, we maybe not always enjoy doing them, but we know how to do them. It's really, really hard to manage the amount of change that we're going through right now. And so we have a quote that we use in our leadership team, which is fail fast and fail forward. Allowing that, building it into the DNA of your teams and making sure that you understand it, you do postmortems on existing, pilot projects, etc. But you also have focused what is the value is going to drive, what is the measure points that we were talking about throughout the call. That's been sort of one of the biggest call outs, right?
Yeah.
Instead of thinking about the activities that you're so well concentrated in, we have 100 customer events next year that we really need to show up at, because if we don't, what is the answer to that? Because if we don't, right? And this happened to us through the pandemic. At that time, our business was definitely a digital business. For many, many years, we were working in digital meetings, etc. Not as well probably set up as it is today. But I was talking constantly with people outside of our businesses or in other aspects of, let's say, a lawyer, right? That would say, this would never work in our line of business.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking about, you're the IT companies, you are software, you're this and that. And then the entire world pivoted because we had to, and suddenly started working for many.
Yeah.
It just like going from here to there, and that change management. I think if we can focus on understanding and seeing that value of shift and automating as much of things that we can rather than investing people power into it, it doesn't need to be AI. It just needs to be scalable.
Yeah. That's good. And one of my favorite questions, if you could get 3 times the budget you have now, what would you do with it? And only rule is that it still needs to be business savvy investment.
I think I went with the recommendations that I just gave as sort of the prediction for the 5-year. So
All right.
I would invest even more heavily in channels such as in-app guidance and network community expansion.
Yeah.
I definitely believe that with the engagement fatigue that we are having, with the technology and security issues that we are having with open rates and click rates, and all of that is just going to go right out of the window at some point. We can't rely on those as business critical numbers. we need to dig one level deeper to understand what we are driving and what value it's bringing. And meeting the users, meeting the customers, and meeting our crowd where they are, and making it available to them and continue to invest in that, I think is one of my biggest picks. Automating. Again, it sounds easy, but scalable automation. If you do a webinar, you know how many hours people take to do a webinar. How do you make that scalable? How do you make that still relevant and not only words, right? That is going to sound the same after a while for all the companies that are saying, we're going to make you more efficient. How? Make that clear to me, and build segmentation. That's what I was saying about customer data platform, right? Understand your cohorts, which is the groups, the segments, the audiences. And the audiences that you have might not be the same audiences that you are doing acquisitions for. Because when you're acquiring something, you're looking at what is the available market out there, right? So who is working in this field? But then when you're looking at the actual, that might change, because I might be, if I have a free product that is a low entry point, if I went out and I looked at, this is a financial director, that's the IT person, that's the in-field person. But if they're using the product, all of them are using the product, then they become a product user. And then suddenly it becomes about, what is the value that I bring to them? So it doesn't matter what job role they have anymore.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have this static way of looking at segmentation. So we only have one set of rules. And then when you try to pivot it and look at the value base, you suddenly don't have enough to understand what you're looking at.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's the biggest difference between post-sale and marketing retention, I would say, versus the more traditional acquisition marketing. So those are the fields that I would definitely invest in. And then, of course, the workforce.
Yeah. So no Super Bowl ads, no ads on the Eurovision Song Contest in Sweden right now. Nothing like that.
Nothing like that. But as I said, meeting your customers where they are. If they're at the song contest, then maybe.
You're in a happy position that you know, based on the past investments and data platforms, you know if they are there. So that's a good.
And I would say, how do you measure it?
Yeah.
Show me the numbers of how you're measuring it. The more people I talk to about this, we know there is a correlation, but if you can't prove it, what happens if you stop, and where do you want to invest? I think picking that cherry of where it makes sense versus trying to build it into, yes, if we don't do this, there might not. Again, as we had to change because the world changed, we started to realize that a lot of the things that we wouldn't consider doing at that point, we suddenly had to take into consideration. And cross-functional team building and understanding that and strengthening that part of it is probably the less invested part still. Everyone wants to build out their teams and their skill sets and their groups, but how are we making 1 + 1, not 2, but 3?
Yeah, definitely. Based on all your experiences, your learnings along the way, what one tip would you give yourself when you were starting out in your first leadership position?
Oh my God. Many tips. But if I pick one, I would say be selective.
About what?
Focus on areas where you can measure impact.
Yeah.
I think success comes from proactive problem solving. As a person that comes from the technical side, I guess moving from a space where I knew everything until getting comfortable into realizing that that's not the case. You can't, open the hood and look into this machine because it's ever evolving, it's ever changing. Yeah. And yet finding areas where you can pivot. And as I was saying, fail fast, fail forward. Good. Trusting that and measuring the impact rather than going wide and doing everything. The only way that you know if you're right and if you need to pivot or change is to actually focus.
Yeah, that's a good tip for us all. Yeah, focus. That's a good tip. All right, it's a little bit over 1 hour about customer retention and customer experience. Great insights. And if our listeners now have listened in the episode and they think, oh, this is such a great insight, I want to hear more from Bita, what's the best way to touch base with you or connect with you? What would you prefer?
Well, I mean, I can be found on LinkedIn. I wouldn't say I'm a regular poster, but I post when I find things that are interesting myself, or where I have been at an industry event or something that I want to share with a broader audience. So definitely happy to have you follow or reach out through LinkedIn and that forum. I would say the way that I currently am in my role, we're in the back, and that's how you see our work. Is you get exposed to what is the outcome, not what I do per se. But I'm happy to have conversations, and I'm really happy to talk about this field. It's a passion, and it's as I said, I think we're in a time where it's never been as exciting as it is now, and we keep saying that for the last 20 years. I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I lived before social media was something,
Yeah.
so there are definitely interesting things to keep following that, and I'm happy to have conversations and learn from others. I think that's the biggest part as well. So.
Definitely. We will add your LinkedIn handle to the show notes as well. All right. Thank you so much for being part of the show. It was great conversation, and I was so immersed to the topics. So I'm getting excited around the topics. So probably we need to think through already the next step. And I make some notes here if I would pull you aside for 1 hour and just kind of mind exercise. Let's take this consulting house case. Use your creative freedom and build me a customer retention or customer experience program. That would be so fun to see with the outcome. But maybe we'll leave that for another time. But thank you so much for being part of the show. Hope you
Thank
had
you.
as great time as myself.
I definitely did. I hope I could leave you with a couple of takeaways, and it was great doing this. And again, feel free to reach out if there is anything I can continue to talk through.
Definitely. And of course, thanks for our listeners for listening to this episode of our Morning Brew. And we will have the next episode around 2 weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Morning Brew for Marketing Executives. We hope you found today's episode insightful and inspiring. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe and leave us a review. It helps us bring you more stories from marketing leaders. This podcast is produced by Maven First. For more information, please visit mavenfirst.com.